Hi, I'm Ron McMahon, Business Development and Innovation Director at SGS Galson. We're proud to sponsor Dr. Sudip Bose's keynote presentation for the AIHCE Expo 2021. I'd like to present to you a special one-on-one conversation with Dr. Bose that expands on his story and some elements from his keynote address. Thank you for watching.
Welcome, I'm Ben Rome, AIHA's Senior Manager of Communications. I want to welcome you to EXP Plus. With me today is Dr. Sudip Bose, a U.S. Army veteran who has served as a battalion surgeon during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Dr. Bose's service earned him a Bronze Star after completing one of the most extended combat tours by physicians since World War II. He remains a practicing emergency physician and health correspondent, splits his time between Texas and Chicago, teaching as a clinical professor, and founded The Battle Continues, a nonprofit focused on helping veterans fight their health battles beyond the combat zone. Dr. Bose is also one of America's most experienced doctors on mass casualty, disaster care, and PTSD. His opening keynote, Leadership Under Pressure, will be available to view via AIHCE EXP on demand. Now, right now, I've got the privilege to have some one-on-one time with Dr. Bose. We're going to dive a little deeper into his experiences in staying grounded while tackling overwhelming challenges with skill and agility. Thank you for joining me today, Dr. Bose.
Hey, Ben, thanks for having me.
So I think the first question I want to ask you is, what really prompted you to choose this very unique career path?
Well, I would imagine like a lot of the people that are listening right now, you don't really know your career path when you're sitting at your commencement from high school or college. And, these big steps that people see, physician, veteran, consists of a lot of smaller steps in between, where sometimes you just go down that path and you see that you're taking one foot in front of the other and taking steps, but only looking back can you see the destination. When I was 8 years old, I saw my grandfather, my mom's father, died from a heart attack. And it made me very interested in medicine. I saw the reaction my mom had and how devastated she was. And just back then, 1980s, heart attack treatment was totally different. I'm a child, and it kind of stimulated me in that direction. And then I guess I got very fortunate and lucky. Northwestern University in Chicago, they had an honors program in medical education. They're called HPME, and they accepted kids straight out of high school into medical school. Wow. And it's great. Like, you still do college, but you have that acceptance. So I kind of zipped through it. I, started med school at 21, became an MD at 25, specialized in emergency medicine at 28. And then in between, I was like, wow, is, this it? I should do something, I felt a calling and another larger calling to make an impact. And I remember hearing these amazing stories of how people took amazing care of my parents when they landed in the United States. And maybe subconsciously, I had this sense of paying it forward or this duty, and decided to sign up for the U.S. Army. And then history became what it became. But of course, when I was sitting at my college graduation, I knew that I'd go into medicine, and if I joined the Army at just the right time, that there'd be a dictator named Saddam Hussein, and he'd be captured, and I'd be there right at that moment. I knew that all along. So, and naturally, I'd be here from my living room at AIHA speaking to you after that. I knew that all along.
Right. So we'll add prognosticator, fortune teller, and time traveler to all those accomplishments. That's great.
Take the steps as they come is kind of how I've gone through it, and try to make the best decisions. Our life is a compilation of our decisions, and a lot of those decisions are under pressure, right? Like, you got to make them. You got to make them quickly. So that's where I hope my lecture adds value and helps everyone.
Great. So along those lines then of making snap decisions like that, can you describe some of the types of stressors and pressures that you and your colleagues have experienced as providers of emergency care on both the battlefield and the front lines of the current pandemic?
I remember clearly, like, the very first patient was early March 2020. I'm working in the emergency room, and I go in and I see a patient with indigestion. And I'm like, oh, okay, bread and butter, indigestion, give some meds, get him on his way, mid-60s gentleman. And right before we send him out, the nurses and I look at the monitor and we're like, wait, why is his oxygen value so low? It shouldn't be that low. So I go through the routine questions. Are you a smoker, sir? And he says, no, I'm not a smoker. And wondering why it's so low. And kind of hearing about what's going on overseas. I ask him if he has any travel. He says no. I ask him what he does for a living. He says, I'm a private pilot. I'm like, have you flown anyone who maybe has been to China or Asia or anywhere where we're hearing about this virus?
Yeah.
And he says, no, I know everyone I fly and they haven't traveled. But something wasn't right. So I transferred him to the intensive care unit. And 4 days later, he died.
Oh, my.
And this was the very first patient in our city with COVID-19. And after that, the next day going to work, I was scared. I was frightened. I mean, this is an unknown enemy. It's an invisible enemy. I don't know anything about it. The medical profession doesn't know anything about it. We don't have the protective equipment to the level we need. We don't have a cure. But it wasn't just me, right? I mean, then the entire medical community, nurses, EMTs, paramedics, techs, custodians, everybody just stepped up amazingly. And it wasn't just them, right? It was all of us. It was all of us. And it's all of us. And that's how we come together as a team, from the nurse on the front line to the person putting the tube in the trachea to an industrial hygienist. I mean, we're all in this together, and I think we're going to get on the other side of this.
Wow. So obviously throughout your career, you've made literal life and death decisions while under hazardous conditions. How do you train for that? I mean, how do you prepare for that type of eventuality or scenario?
I think you have to recognize when you're in peacetime and wartime. And when you're in peacetime, you can just chill out and do nothing, or you can kind of push that pain threshold. So in the world of physical Army fitness, we built our strength, our stamina, the rappel tower. If you ever need to rappel off a helicopter in wartime, you prepare in peacetime. You don't want to do it for the first time in wartime. Gas chamber, all this training. So similarly, it's this training in peacetime. And then in wartime, you have to just perform and improvise as needed. So in peacetime, maybe if you're studying, so we go from our physical Army, let's talk about our mental Army. You're studying, you're repeating, rote repetition, practicing drills, and then you implement that knowledge in wartime and learn to improvise and bypass and perform at that moment. So it's that peacetime that allows it.
It sounds a lot like a lot of rote training provides you muscle memory to react in situations you're not thinking about it. So would it be honest to say, for some professions, having that mental memory, that it's an instantaneous, exactly the steps if you just discern a particular or a danger threshold or whatever? Would that be very similar to that peacetime, wartime type?
Kind of, it is. It's like in the beginning of something, you're incompetent. You just don't know. And you don't know that you don't know, which can be dangerous. And then you get to the next level where you don't know, but you realize you don't know. And then you get to this kind of conscious level where, okay, you're improving, you're trying to improve, but it's taking mental strength. And then you get to the top of the triangle, which is just unconscious competence, where it's rote memory and you don't have to think and use brain cells to do certain things. So as much as you can get in that unconscious competence, basically, is you can use those brain cells for what you need them for. They say the brain has 5 buckets, maybe 7. And if you fill those buckets, after that, you start becoming overwhelmed. So if you can make certain things unconscious, so it's not using that bucket, you can use those buckets for things you need.
Okay. Yeah.
So in the emergency room, for example, I'm sitting there, there's 30 beds in the ER, and you have a heart attack in that room, a stroke in that room, a broken bone there, an opioid overdose there. How do you prioritize everything? Who's first? And what are you doing with the buckets? Can you get something going on one patient so that you can put your attention on another, then go back to that one? And that's the art of life, the art of triage, kind of like we talked about in the lecture.
Okay. So how important is it for leadership teams to monitor and address the mental health of frontline workers?
The mental health is extremely important. It's like the invisible enemy almost, where, looking directly at a soldier, for example, when I see a soldier who survived grenades and gunfire and then comes back and takes his or her own life, it breaks my heart. And similarly, with anyone going under any form of stress, post-traumatic stress is a threat or a perceived threat to your own life. You're going to have ramifications from that. And today's threat is not a saber-toothed tiger coming out from behind a bush. Today's threat is just that chronic stress that's always pinging on our phone or pinging on our computer, or deadlines. But physiologically, the body reacts to stress very similarly, whether it's modern day stress of today or the saber-toothed tiger from back in the day. So if you can understand and control that physiology, you can make better decisions under pressure, which is what we discussed in our talk earlier today.
Okay. Are you familiar with any successful workplace intervention programs that could be replicated in other essential industries?
Sure. You'll see in the paramedic literature, you'll see in frontline provider literature, there has been studies done on this. So one thing I found interesting is the critical incident stress debrief incident. Something happens, we had a mass shooting in our city. I'm the medical director for Odessa Fire Rescue, and we had a mass shooting there in 2019. And we had to all meet and kind of go over what happened, what could have been better, what could have been different. We do that after many cases in the emergency room so that you can do a debrief. And that time you can also talk about your emotions and how you felt, and letting that out is important. In World War II, when our soldiers came back, they came back on ship. And, you heard about shell shock, but they had time to talk about it and chat with each other. It's not a quick plane ride away. So I think that debrief helped us in the emergency room. And then we also learned that with these frontline providers, you can't force it. Okay, it's time to go talk about your feelings. Just make those resources available and decrease the stigma and have that happen. But you don't have to shove it down their throats, because some people need it, some people don't. And it's annoying when you don't need it and don't want it to.
Yeah. Okay. So we've been hearing reports of increased deaths of via despair during the pandemic due to drug overdose, alcohol poisoning, suicide. Do you have any suggestions on how industrial hygienists and occupational and environmental health and safety specialists can work with employers and frontline staff to kind of help reverse that trend?
I can talk about this from a professional perspective, and the opioid epidemic is huge. It's surpassed car accidents for the number of deaths right now. And I'm seeing this regularly in the emergency room. So if I talk about this from the professional perspective of, what industrial hygienists do, I think I don't even have the scientific knowledge that some of the AIHs do. So I'm going to pivot a little more to the personal perspective, which is that we're human beings first and foremost. And these invisible mental injuries that we talk about, post-traumatic stress, or the things you discussed, drug overdose, et cetera, someone's struggling inside, someone's hurting, and they're trying to numb that pain out. And I'm not going to recognize that sometimes in the emergency room. I can recognize a heart attack. I can do an EKG and check a troponin level. But some of these, like isolation from society, withdrawing, that sort of thing, you'll notice as a family member, as a coworker, that person in the cubicle next to you. You're the one who's going to notice that and say, hey, something isn't right. We talked about post-traumatic stress being blamed on some isolated event, traumatic event that a soldier saw. It doesn't make sense to me, because, why are we blaming these symptoms on a trauma that happened decades ago, or for people who never even saw combat, they're having it. I think it's more post-traumatic isolation syndrome, where they come back from war and they're just isolated. And we need to reintegrate them to society, give them a coffee, reach them a hand, give them a job. You can give them a job. Veteran unemployment's a big issue. There's a nonprofit, bridgemyreturn.com, Bridge My Return, that helps them find jobs. There's lots of resources out there. So in summary, I'd say for industrial hygienists, pivot to the personal side and recognize when someone's struggling with these issues, and you can reach out that hand, and that can make a big difference. And professionally, you know more about the science and this than I would be able to tell you.
Okay, great. So what are the core leadership qualities that you've learned through your experiences that these OEHS professionals can apply to their own disaster recovery and relief work?
Some of the core leadership principles that I've learned that hopefully will help you as an industrial hygienist are, first and foremost, your body, your inner army, keeping that strong, physically, mentally, emotionally. So in the talk, we talk about how you can actually control your physiology from up here to your intake of what you're taking and maximize your performance. So that's the first part of leadership, is check yourself before you wreck yourself, right? So you got to take care of that. And then we talked about triage, prioritizing, taking parts from war and how to prioritize appropriately, recognizing when to let go, what can wait and what needs prioritization right now. And also just interacting with people and touching that emotional side. We talked about the professional and the personal. That personal side matters because, we're in this together, all of us.
Great. And for our particular audience of IHOEHS professionals, what is one key aspect or message that you really hope to just kind of walk away from with today?
I think I'll go back to keeping your inner army strong. Physically, mentally, emotionally, do that, and then you can handle whatever the world throws at you. Remember, it's a series of steps to get to where you want to get, and you just have to take each little step to get there. And how do you do that? I mean, we're given one vehicle to get through this thing called life. It's our body. We got to take care of that. We got to take care of up here, and we talked about some of the ways you can pivot your thinking in my talk. So when you're in these stressful moments, keep your inner army strong and plow ahead.
Okay. And before we finish up today, I'd really like to just ask you a couple of questions about the nonprofit that you founded, The Battle Continues. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? How did it come about? What's your mission, and what were you aligning for the future?
Sure. And thank you for allowing me to talk about this. I really appreciate it. It's where my passion and my heart is. I came back from Iraq and I realized veterans need a lot of help still. The battle continues for veterans. So I called it thebattlecontinues.org. And it's what I'm got frustrated with other nonprofits is how much that administration keeps. So I wanted this one to be 100% going to the injured veteran. And I want to stick through that through the life of this. So if someone donates $26, all 26 goes to an injured veteran. And that's important, I think, for the donor. So my goal here is, because it's 100% going to injured veterans, I don't have the budget for advertising at Walmart or the Super Bowl show or some of these other nonprofits, what they're doing, crazy advertisement, billboards. It's a lot of word of mouth. And this is where you, AIHA, as an individual, if you just spread the word, it could make a big difference. I mean, someone donates 20 bucks, that goes to the medical bills for an injured veteran. So what happens? The donation comes in online, it lands in a glass fishbowl, so it's fully transparent, 501c3, and you can see what's coming in, you can see what's going out, and it sits there till I find an injured veteran and I cut them a check. Our board of directors kind of decides, you know, who to give it to, and we cut them a check for medical expenses. Simple as that. Nothing fancy like hunting, fishing trips, this, that. It's more just, I'm a full-time emergency physician and I'm trying to do this kind of on the side to help people. And as I get platforms like this talk at AIHA, I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about it. And you know, any of the speaking fees go to support some of that overhead cost. So that 100% of donations go to veterans, which literally is a check to the veteran. And the veteran appreciates it because they're struggling, and that check, they can use it for their prosthetic leg. They can use it for whatever medical thing they want to use it for.
Great. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Bose. We are, as an organization and as you know, the staff, we're very appreciative and thankful for not just your time sharing with us about your experiences, but also we're really appreciative of your service to the country and to your fellow man throughout your career and going forward. So if you want more information about Dr. Bose and his endeavors, as well as thebattlecontinues.org, please follow the links on your screen. And any last words you want to say?
Yeah, one thing I'd really like to just personally say to each and one of you is, so it's been an honor to be the keynote speaker, but I'd like to put this in perspective. Like when we saw an injured patient on the battlefield, everybody's like, oh, the doctor or the medic saved him, but it took the doctor, it took the medic, it took the person carrying the stretcher, it took the person flying the helicopter, it took the person who packed the parachute of the person, that took the pilot. So in the middle of a world pandemic, in a situation we're in like now, you may be that person on the back end. And for every person on the front line, there's 15 plus people supporting them. And none of those roles are any less important. They are so important, and things don't function without it. So it's so humbling to be able to speak to this group, but just realize that what you're doing as an IH and what you're doing is really making an impact that those on the front line are seeing. And some of you are on the front line, but it's not to be discounted. Like, you need that person carrying the stretcher. You need the pilot. You need the person flying the helicopter. You need all those people.
Yep.
All
Excellent.
of us.
It's a great way to end it. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bose. So we'll say see you later. And this has been a production of AIHA and AIHC EXP Plus. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.